I broke through the carbonate, that's how I got free. Drop it back off because there's no stopping me. Postmodern player, sample-tastic, flows ekphrastic. I get drastic, hey, watch the plastic. Yo, I name check and leave you drastic.
Welcome to the MacGuffin. I am joined with a special guest today. I am joined by Ryder Strong.
Hello.
You might know him from any number of things: Boy Meets World, Cabin Fever, some short work he's doing now, hopefully. We'll see. But we're going to start sort of in the beginning, if you will, just because chronologically it'll be easier for people so I don't go on too many tangents too quickly.
All right.
Firstly, I want to get it cleared out of the way. At what age did you start acting? Because I've seen like 5, I've seen 9, I've seen all sorts of stuff.
I actually started acting when I was like 5. Yeah, doing plays, just local small-time theater productions. I started professionally acting when I was 9.
Okay.
That was my first professional. I did Les Miserables in San Francisco, and that was the first time it was like, oh, they are going to pay me to do this. And, that was when it became an actual career. Before that, I was just, being a kid, taking acting classes.
And in terms of like acting, how did that come about? I guess a lot of people, it's probably hard for you since you grew up as an actor to maybe look at it from an outside perspective, but like someone like me, when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like I don't even know if like I had like conscious thought of like I want to do anything. Like I just want to like throw a ball around. It was like the extent of my like organized thinking at that point.
I don't know. My brother and I, we were really hyper, and I think my parents just did a lot to sort of channel that energy. And so I think that acting classes just became another thing for us to do. And we were always making stuff. My dad came home with a video camera when I was only like 2. And we were already like making superhero movies and, already just sort of throwing ourselves in. We would always do like things in the neighborhood, like put on shows we were just kind of those, annoying kids that like were super geeky and like really loud. And so I think that just sort of evolved into actual acting, learning lines and going on stage and acting classes. And then that became an actual career, really only because people started coming to us about it. My parents had nothing to do with the business, had no interest in, having their kids be child actors. Like none of that. It was very organic the way it happened. Like people kept sort of calling us and saying like, oh, your kids should do this over here or this play over here. And then suddenly it's an agent from LA saying like, come to LA and be professional actors. And, we did. It was a lot of fun.
Have you like since gone back and talked to your parents about like that experience of figuring out like, I'm almost 30 now, and like I feel like I'm just beginning to sort of get a grasp on how to like live in as adult.
Right.
Like I can't imagine, as a parent trying to be like, oh, okay, my kid wants to act now. Hollywood agents are calling me.
It's insane. I know. I was just having this conversation with my brother. I was like, do you realize how much pressure that must have put on our parents? Like, yeah, and they're amazing. I mean, my dad was a firefighter, which was helpful because he could trade shifts. So like he would trade shifts with other guys. It didn't matter who was there as long as a lieutenant was on or whatever. So he would trade his shifts around. So he would end up having like weeks off at a time, and then he would work 24-hour shifts. So my dad was around a lot more than I think, if he had a regular job. And then my mom only taught part-time, and she ended up quitting once we became full-time actors because it took over our lives. And they're amazing. Like they were just so committed and awesome. And like, yeah, I look back and I'm like, I don't know if I would do that for my kid, like that's insane.
So, you started to get some attention, some Hollywood folks calling around. And I was noticing on your filmography, at least according to IMDb, you were in something called Julie with Julie Andrews.
Yeah.
Like, what exactly was that? Because just looking at that, I'm like, holy shit, that's a pretty wild looking thing.
They created a sitcom for Julie Andrews, and it was a live studio audience. It was my first real sitcom job, and I played her son. And, it was Julie Andrews, and Blake Edwards, her husband, the late Blake Edwards, directed it. And actually, James Ferrantino, who just died last week.
Yeah, very appropriate timing.
He was the father. He played the father. So, crazy to think about now. But yeah, so it was a really big, it was a big show for ABC. They really pushed it. And it wasn't very good. We did a pilot, and the pilot was actually really good, I thought. I mean, I know I was 11, but in retrospect, it was about her being on a variety show and having a family, which kind of made sense. Like she was
Right,
singing
yeah.
and dancing and doing Julie Andrews stuff, but then also like what it's like to be a mom. Wah, wah, wah. But then they rewrote it when we went to series, and we did 6 episodes where the show, they completely changed it. So suddenly she was a stepmom. Suddenly she was moving the show from LA to Sioux City, Iowa. Like it made no sense.
Wow.
And the show kind of got derailed. And Blake Edwards was directing every episode, and he hadn't really directed television and probably shouldn't have been directing television because, you know, television is a very tight schedule and you're taping in front of a live audience, and he just didn't want to deal with any of that. He wanted to be making a movie every week. And so we were like, a normal episode of sitcom takes about 5 days to rehearse and then shoot, and he was taking like 2 to 3 weeks per episode. So going way over budget. Yeah. So that show got canceled after 6 episodes and then dumped on like the summer schedule. Yeah.
Like, were you cognizant though of it when you like went in there? Like, this is Julie Andrews, because I mean, for me, like I know who Julie Andrews
Yeah,
is now,
yeah.
but if I was like 11, I think you said
No,
you were.
I did
like,
because Mary Poppins and like if you think about it, like they were all kids movies,
Right.
So like
That's true.
I
That's
definitely
true.
knew that like I was working with, you know, like it was a big deal. Like it was definitely exciting, and she couldn't have been nicer. But yeah, I mean, I don't think at 11 you don't care that much. I mean, you care because it was like, oh, you're the lady from the TV, you know, the movie or
Knives and
whatever.
Broomsticks,
Exactly. It was
rock
like,
on.
but it wasn't. I mean, I wasn't starstruck. You know, I don't think as a kid you really get starstruck that way. At least I didn't. You know, but you know, I was stoked to be working with her. Like she was cool.
You say you weren't starstruck, but that sort of brings to my mind another question. Like, did you feel pressure because of you knowing who she is? Like, it wasn't just some like, oh, that dude's first acting job as
Right.
well. It's like, this is somebody who I have seen
Yeah.
in movies. Like,
Yeah.
did you feel that, or were you just so excited to be there that
I
it was
think
like,
I was just so excited. That's funny. I mean, it's a good question, but I don't remember. Like, I wasn't an anxious kid. Like, I remember being pretty just stoked, you know? Like, I mean, that's the thing. Like, when you're acting at that age, I don't think you have a lot of the self-consciousness that you develop when you get older as an actor, where you're like suddenly,
Sure.
oh, do I look like an idiot in front of the camera? When you're an actor at that age, at least I was, it was much more like, what do I do? How do I get the most laughs? How do I get the most attention? It was just like, it was all external. You know, you're like, you're not looking in at yourself yet. That doesn't happen until you're 13 and you're on Boy Meets World and you have like terrible acne. Then you're suddenly looking at yourself
We'll get
and going,
to some
"Whoa."
Boy Meets World, because I definitely have like you
Yeah.
you know, you talk about like growing up and knowing things like, you know, Sound of Music and all that
Right.
sort of stuff. I definitely remember growing up in Boy Meets World and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I first want to sort of quickly go, because that's going to be a discussion. I also saw that you were in My Giant,
Yeah.
the Billy Crystal, George Mirasan movie.
Yeah.
Like, how did that come about? Did you actually like audition for that movie?
Oh yeah. That was just a regular audition. And in fact, I think the kid originally in the script, because the part that I played was I play a kid star who fires Billy Crystal as his agent. So that's the sort of beginning of the movie is
Right.
me firing Billy Crystal, and he like flies all the way to Prague to visit me, and I fire him. And I'm working on a movie, and I'm a total snob. And I think originally the kid was only supposed to be like maybe 12 or 13. And so I was sort of too old for the part, because I think I was already 16 or 17. But I came in and I read for it, and then they brought me back in, and I met with Billy Crystal, and we just got along. And, you know, it was only really like one major scene in the movie, but
Right.
it was so much fun. And I got to go to Prague with my brother. They flew to Prague, and, you know, I got to sit with Billy Crystal and hang out. Like, we had all these sound issues because we were filming in a tent, and we were stuck in this tent for like a couple of weeks, like filming
Wow.
the one scene. But it was awesome because it's just killing time with Billy Crystal.
Yeah, I imagine like the experience of it had to be like, especially if, as someone who's done a lot of comedic work, has to be pretty gratifying and learning experience. But like looking back on that as like an adult, do you look at like a premise like he meets a basketball player and he comes back to America, and you're like, wow, this is kind of crazy, and that's
No,
like,
you know,
almost a '90s thing.
Totally. You know, it was always it was actually pitched to me because I was a huge fan of The Princess Bride, and when I was a kid,
yeah.
and I remembered that the whole thing was based on him and Andre the Giant being
yeah.
friends, and the fact that Andre the Giant had died died young because you know
Right.
people that are that big. So it was always a very personal film for Billy Crystal, and he like spearheaded the movie. So I mean, like in retrospect, it's kind of a sappy film, and that's kind of its problem. Like if I haven't seen it in a long time.
No,
but
totally.
It ends
absolutely.
up being very sappy instead of being like a goofy comedy about a big guy and a little guy.
Right.
It's like it is a weird.
There's also like that whole like thing, like, you know, like The Mighty was sort of the same principle that Joseph Mazzoli film, I believe Sharon Stone or somebody was in it.
Yeah,
Like,
I never saw it, but
like
yeah.
it was the same sort of idea, like big and small. It's sort of a quirky.
Right.
The problem,
Twins.
like, well, like, I have a special place for Twins because I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and so like a whole bunch of that movie was filmed where I grew
Okay.
up. It's sort of like, oh yeah, church from
Right.
Twins. It's Twins and
funny.
Young Guns. Those were the two
All right.
like big things coming out of Santa Fe. But like the problem, like it was sort of sappy, but you also have like a completely unexperienced actor as like one of your leads,
Yeah.
which is kind of a ballsy decision. Like if it were Andre the Giant, I'm sure it would have been friggin' awesome just because it was Andre the Giant. But
Right.
George Miller saying it was a bit of a stretch too.
Totally.
but-
And he was miserable.
Was he really?
I just remember seeing him on set, and he was like, "This is really boring. Just standing around, it's like just sitting there for hours." He didn't understand like why he had to be there. And it's true, like acting, there's a lot of parts about acting that just kind of suck, and you don't realize it, and I can imagine him as like star in a movie. Okay, this will be fun, and then
I gotta imagine his whole life is gonna be kind of weird for like acting, like being a basketball player, like
Right.
his whole thing being 7'6",
Yeah.
just like your entire life is
Yeah.
gonna be crazy. So let's step back to Boy Meets World. Sure. I definitely grew up during that period of was it TGIF and all that sort of stuff. What was it like to sort of be around during the prime time of like the late night kid friendly shows? I mean, I don't think there's anything quite the equivalent for God knows how many, like over a decade at least now.
No, Disney, I mean, they just sort of made their channel, the Disney Channel and Nickelodeon
That's true,
has sort
yeah.
of just, they've made it their daytime all the time. They've made whole channels just for that. So, at the time, I mean, I'm surprised that TGIF hasn't come back. I know that there's always been talk about it, like the idea of, because Friday night is a notoriously bad time for ratings.
Absolutely.
And it's like, why not put kids shows on? Because it seems like counter programming, and there are families that want to watch shows together.
And if anybody's not out on a Friday night, it's kids.
Exactly. It made perfect sense, and it was genius programming. And when we were canceled, it was right around the time that ABC was really investing in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Like that was taking over everything.
That is trippy to think that was
so
that
it was
long
like
ago.
all the reality TV sort of surge killed a lot of the regular
still
programming.
killing a lot
I
of
know.
stuff, unfortunately.
But at that time it was like, oh, let's put Who Wants to Be a Millionaire on every night. And it was like, wait a minute, like it's kind of nice to have Friday night is just for kids, Thursday night is for this, or whatever.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that whole philosophy went out the window at the network at that time. So I don't know. It was fun. I mean, and also TGIF, like we saw a lot of shows come and go around us.
You guys were one of the few that sort of stayed the entire time. There were definitely a few that I remember. I think it was Step by Step was during that same.
But see,
time.
Step by Step then went and did a different. Like they moved some of them. Like if shows did really well, they would get kicked off of and go to like Tuesday night. Because Full House, I think, started as TGIF too.
Did it really? Wow,
I'm pretty
that's
sure.
crazy.
Yeah, and so we were always like a sort of steady, like we were never a breakout hit, but we had like our following. So we were like steady on the Friday night thing. But like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which came in after us, ended up doing a lot better than us for a while. And shows would do better or worse. And it was an interesting, we never sort of, they moved us at one point to like 9:30 at night, which made no sense.
Yeah, that's
like,
really
what?
pushing it.
Right, and we actually made a joke about it on the show. It's a pretty funny episode. There's like Corey's babysitting a kid or whatever, and he's upset because his favorite show with the curly-haired kid got moved to 9:30, and he's like, they're trying to kill the shows. We did lots of self-referential stuff,
pretty
and they
awesome.
ended up moving us back to 8:30. So
Like at that point, you had been on Julie and stuff like that. Did you sort of look at it as just another opportunity to be on a project, or did you sort of look to do TV acting because you were familiar with it? Like, was it just luck?
It's totally luck. I was so jaded at that point too. I was also like, I was like an old Hollywood hack already. It was like, this show's never gonna get picked up. Because Julie, the thing is, Julie had been so exciting because it was like a big job, and I was 11 or 12. It was like, by the time Boy Meets World came around, I only had like a couple lines in the pilot. I was supposed to be a regular, but at the time, when you're a kid actor and like you get any sort of heat, there's not a whole lot of you. Like, there's not a lot of competition. So, like, I was like at one television season, you know, you go through a pilot season and you test, you go to network for each different network. It's like, you know, a big deal. And I went on the year I got Boy Meets World, I think I tested for all 3 networks for different shows. So it was like, you know, because there's not a lot of competition when you're a kid. Like, you know, there's only whatever. And I was sort of, you know, coming off of Julie, and Boy Meets World was the smaller part one. That was like, oh, this is, because it's not the main kid, you know, it was a Ben Savage's show. So it was like, oh, you'll just be the second fiddle. And I remember being kind of like, all right, whatever, I'll do this. And it wasn't until the show we got in, picked up, and we started making episodes that it was like, this is so much fun. And it was really when they introduced the Topanga character, which I think is like our 5th episode, that we all sort of looked at each other and we were like, oh, this is the show. Like, because, you know, originally it was a show about a kid who lived next door to his principal. That was the thrust of the show.
Yeah.
So it was really supposed to be about Ben and Mr. Feeney and his parents. And it wasn't until like they introduced Danielle onto the show, it was like, oh, this is a love story, and this is about a kid and his friends, and, you know, the woman that he ends up marrying. Like that.
I definitely see the sort of the perspective of initially of it being about him and his principal living next door to each other. But, you know, sort of me looking back, and I mean, I'm sure this is the way it evolved, and that's why I remember it that way. It's the 3 of you, sort of the friendship. Right. I mean, there's that love story between them. You know, that's
right.
Par for the course. I mean, every teen or whatever. But, like, I mean, at the same time, like, I don't know if you'd want to call it a bromance or something like that, because that's sort of like a pop culture term now or whatever. But, like, there's definitely, you know, a special relationship between you and him.
Totally.
Like, it was definitely more than just like, you're the occasional next door kid, like, you know, Kimmy Gibbler from, you know, Full House or something, where you just pop up, say something quirky, and then you're gone.
No, they gave us a whole, they gave my character a lot of drama. They gave him a lot of storylines. And yeah, I mean, our friendship became such an essential. I mean, even their wedding episode ends up being almost more about our friendship than their relationship. Like, you know, it's a joke, and we made we did lots of like semi-gay episodes too, where we were like cheating on each other with girls, and like, you know, I mean, it was always fun. They like it evolved, you know, but it wasn't supposed to be that way originally. Originally, it was supposed to be Corey had 2 best friends, but they couldn't find another kid that they liked. Like, we kept having, we actually had a chair in the cafeteria set that we called the death chair, because every kid that got cast to play our other best friend would get fired.
It's like the red shirt.
Yeah. And that there was an episode, the episode where he straightens his hair, there was another kid that was supposed to be helping him straighten his hair, and and they were like, let's just make it all Ryder, and they fired the kid, and my character Sean became like an essential part of the show in that moment. And it was nice. I mean, and then I think they realized like that Ben and I really got along. You know, we had a lot of fun together, and
chemistry.
and like acting chemistry, I've never, like, there was we reached the point where we would learn our lines so quickly and be able to read each other so well that like there was no fear. You know, it was like, we cannot make a mistake here. It's just we just build on each other, and it was really. I mean, I think when that happened, you know, early on, I think the writers were like, oh, let's go with that. Let's make this show about the kids. So yeah, it was fun.
So that's a special show, at least in my memory. I'm sure it's a special show for you.
Sure.
Interesting though. Sort of towards the tail end of that, you went on to be on the Starship Troopers TV show. What was that like to be coming into a property that had this huge movie, but like nobody who was in the movie was associated with it? It was moving to the realm of TV, and that had to adapt, you know, like.
Well, it was just a voiceover job, you know. It was just voice, so it was like, it was easy. I mean, that's the easiest job in the world. Like, you know, and it was also one of the first cartoons to be all CGI, so that was a big deal at the time. It was like there weren't, you know, a lot of. It was a lot of fun, and you know, like, I still am friends with people that I worked with on that. Alexander Polinsky, who is I actually cast him in my short film. He's the star of my short film. I know him because we did that series together. That's awesome. Like, so yeah, doing voiceover work is so much fun. It was a blast. But yeah, I mean, it was a weird adaptation too of the movie, like. Well, of the book, of the movie. It was a weird,
the whole series is kind of crazy, you know. Like,
and I think they're redoing it again. I think they're doing another Starship.
Like, they had like the first one, then there was you guys, then the sequel, and then like a direct-to-video one, and they like brought like, I think, Casper Van Dien back. It's sort of like the Fast and the Furious, you know, like, evolved. That brings us to Cabin Fever. One of the reasons why you're in Seattle is for a special screening of this. Was that a conscious decision to go into a horror film? Because you've done a lot of comedy and stuff like that, or was it just like, this sounds like a cool project, why don't I do this?
Yeah, I just got it was just an audition like everything else. I was actually kind of leaving the industry. I was going to school in New York, and it was like a last minute like, oh, there's this horror thing. And at that time, if anything that was conscious about it, it was like, oh, a chance to play an older character, because I still looked very young, and it was clearly somebody who was graduating from college. And I was like, oh, because I was only 21 at the time, and I was like, I like this idea. And I met with Eli Roth, and we just hit it off. And it was like an amazing audition. It went so well, and we just sort of clicked. It was like, it was me and Eli and his brother Gabe, who I'm still best friends with. And we just sort of like, we all looked at each other and we were like, this is awesome. Like this, whatever's happening in this room, like we should make this movie. And it was just fun. And then September 11th happened, like right after the audition. And I was in New York City, and school was like, it was just stressful. And I got the offer to go do the movie in North Carolina, like only 3 weeks after September 11th.
Wow.
And and I was like, you know what? That's perfect. I dropped out for the semester, took a semester off, went and did it, and had an amazing, amazing time.
Because it's funny, like, now people hear the name Eli Roth, and it's sort of like, oh, Eli Roth, he's a fancy horror director, blah, blah, blah. But, at that time, like, he wasn't Eli Roth. He was just, like, a dude. And
totally.
It's kind of interesting to imagine, if somebody came up to you and was like, Robert Rodriguez wants you to be in a film, you're like, oh, I know Robert Rodriguez, I'd be in that movie. But then it's sort of like, this is some guy I've never heard of. I have no idea if this horror film is going to be any good. Like, it's a really bold decision to do that. And it's just sort of that experience with him that sort of ultimately led you to do it.
Yeah. Well, he's just an awesome communicator. Like, he's an amazing director, and he's very passionate, and at the time, like, people weren't making horror films like that really yet. Like, the sort of R-rated, because like it was coming off of like the sort of Scream era, and everything was sort of either funny or safe or PG rated, and he was like, no, I want to go back to the 70s and the 80s. I want blood, I want tits, I want and like he was so, and it was fun, it was like to sit in a room and have a conversation with somebody who's like, this is what I'm going to do to horror. And he did. I mean, he did exactly what he wanted to do. And I think that it was infectious, pun intended.
Yeah. It's funny to think, though, like, even the movie still is, like, restrained for Eli Roth. Like, he definitely, like, once that one hit, he's like, all right, people like this. I can really go to town.
Totally. Yeah, well, I mean, there were different drafts of the script, too. Like, he had different lines in the script that he kept out. Like we have a very famous use of the N-word in Cabin Fever. In the script, it didn't have that. So like funny. We show up and he was like, here's what I'm going to do. Because, he had to get money to make his movie. And like he was scared that if there's certain things that he ramped up the gore. It was like, oh, we could have the dog eat her. And like, there were decisions being made on the fly, like based on what he could get access to. And yeah, I'm sure by the time he got to Hostel, it was like, oh, he already had a film that did well under his belt. He was like, all right, now what can I do? And let's take it over the top.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing film, and it was funny because like you and everyone else in the film seemed to be at like the perfect time coming into that movie. Like everyone was just like successful enough, like not like Tom Cruise or something, but they were all sort of like growing, going upwards, and then you hit that, and it was like boom. Yeah, it just worked out perfect timing wise. Yeah. That sort of made me want to talk about also Borderland, because again, sort of a horror-ish type film. I kind of think of it like the Hangover, but everything's kind of goes wrong.
That's true. I never thought about it.
It's three guys, go down to Mexico looking for a good time. One of them ends up disappearing. Shit goes wrong. Like really, really wrong. And was it because of your experience working on films like Cabin Fever that you were interested in?
Yeah, well, Borderland, I mean, it's actually the same producer as Cabin Fever. And so it was a total fluke. They had asked me to audition for it, and I was kind of like, I don't know about horror. And, I didn't want to do too much of the same sort of thing over and over again. But I did like the script. And actually, I had seen the first film by the director, Zev Berman, is a great film called Plain Dirty. When I saw it, it was called Briar Patch. It's a great film. And it was a lot of the same people that had worked on Cabin Fever worked on his first film, because they shot in North Carolina, and so the same music. Nathan Barr did the music for Cabin Fever. The same DP, Scott Keevan. So their team was sort of coming back to make Borderland. So it was one of those like, and I walked in to audition for something else, and they hadn't found an actor yet. And Lauren Mays, the producer, she was like, "Hey, writer, what are you here for?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm here about this other movie." And she's like, "What are you doing in 3 days? You want to shoot, Borderland?" And I was
awesome.
like, okay. And it was a blast. It was a lot of work. It was really a tough film. We were shooting in Mexico, in Tijuana, which is, it's like a border town. It's like it is in the movie. It's hardcore. And and it was also just physically exhausting. I'm like chained up for half the movie, and like
it's crazy,
getting hung upside down in my underwear. Like it's not like the most comfortable movie.
Also
to shoot.
Crazy Sean Astin.
Yeah. Well, that was great. I mean, they didn't have Sean at first. Like when I got the part, I remember being like, "It's really gonna matter who I'm up against." When they mentioned Sean, I was like, "This is great casting."
This has got to be like, I'm trying to think time wise. Like this is probably right around the end or right around. When Lord of the Rings,
middle of the Lord of the Rings,
like that's got to be kind of crazy to be like he's like got everybody in the world looking at him, and you're like, he's torturing me in this movie.
Totally. Well, he was just excited to play something different, and because even still to this day, I think he's probably has a hard time being taken outside of the Lord of the Rings context, unless it's maybe a comedy. Rudy. Right. So he's got to really, so for him to play like a serial killer cult member, it's pretty awesome, and he was really excited to do it, and we had a blast working together.
The other reason why you're in town is you've got a film that you and your brother co-directed and co-wrote, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. That's part of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Short Film Festival.
Yes,
SIFF,
I know.
as
So
the
many
seventh annual. A lot of Is this something that you have interest in doing going forward, directing, writing, and sort of going behind the camera? Is this just a change of pace for you? What is this? What are you
No, this is totally
forward?
my new direction. I'm kind of done with acting, so this is so much more satisfying.
And I guess I should note, the film is called The Dungeon Master.
Yes. Yeah. This is actually our second short film. We made a short film a couple years ago called Irish Twins, and that was our first sort of stab at filmmaking, because we'd always done stuff together, writing, but that was like, all right, let's take this seriously, and we had a really just a great time and decided that we want to keep making movies. So The Dungeon Master was our second one, and with Irish Twins we had put ourselves in it to sort of save money and time. That was kind of a big mistake, because we realized after the fact that it ends up sort of coming across like a vanity project. It's like, look at us acting, when really for us it was about moving behind the camera and doing something different. So The Dungeon Master, we assembled a cast of friends and
you did a great job. Like, I mean, I assume that there was probably something like that at work, but you got like Adam Bush from The Professional, Buffy, American Dreams. It was Travis Schultz.
Yeah, Schultz.
From Scrubs, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And I also have a sort of personal affection for Chris Wilde. Mostly just because of that scene in Coyote Ugly and the Chris Wilde show. Those two things, for whatever reason,
he's a genius.
Resonated with me.
He's a genius. Like Chris Wilde. I mean, when you see The Dungeon Master, if you can.
I saw The Dungeon.
Oh, you did?
Cool. Yes. EMP Sci-Fi Museum hooked me up.
He's so funny, and like he is just crazy. Like his ability to improv and like. Because we would write lines that we would be like, they're kind of funny, see what you can do with it, and he would just go off. And every take was different. And he's that manic comedic energy. He's brilliant. He's really brilliant.
It's a really fun film, and it's funny, but there's some times that are kind of disturbing, which are well done. The effects and stuff, I have to say, you guys did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Like, I wasn't sure exactly what you guys were going to do with it. You can sort of feel it out as it's going along. But once you actually get into it, it's really well done. You should almost make that into a feature.
Yeah, we are. We're making it into a feature.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And one of the strangest things that I really liked in the film was the end credits, the animation
drawing,
stuff. That stuff was just fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, we had this whole idea because we grew up watching like the what are they, Rankin Bass films, like The Hobbit, and they always had their credits old school animation sketchy. So our artist friend who had actually sculpted our goblin for us and done a lot of the makeup effects for our film, we were like, do you think maybe you could do like a Rankin Bass sort of where we tell the rest of the story of like what happens to these characters? And sure enough, he was able to pull it off, and
That's
yeah,
awesome.
it was fun.
It is a fun film, and hopefully everyone can get out there and see it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not online yet, but hopefully at some point.
It will be. Yeah, we were getting distribution, so it'll be available eventually. So.
So I know you've done that. I saw you did something called Blood Merchant, which is a graphic novel.
Yeah,
is that what that is?
Yeah. My brother and I wrote a graphic novel with the same artist, Rob Pryor.
Really? That
yeah.
sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's great. It's a vampire thing, which I know everyone's a little sick of, but it's a new
As long
take.
as it's not Twilight.
No,
Yeah.
it's sort of like Goodfellas meets vampire story. So it's like it's a human who there are all these gangs in New York that are vampire gangs, and he deals blood to them, like he's their blood
that's cool.
dealer. Yeah. So Blood Merchant.
So what's next? I mean, you've talked about doing the feature length.
Yeah, well, that's what
Dungeon
we're working on
Master.
right now. We're doing the feature-length version of Dungeon Master. We're finishing up the script for that, and that'll probably take over our lives because that's going to be a big project.
Yeah, I imagine.
That's the main goal right now, but of course, that's a very expensive sort of big project. So in the meantime, I have a feeling we'll probably end up doing a little horror film or something smaller that we can sort of gather our friends and run off into the woods and go shoot ourselves because we're getting antsy. We made Dungeon Master like 2 years ago, and we've just been going to festivals, and now we're kind of like, we just need to shoot something. So, if anybody wants to give us money to make a movie.
Where can people go to find more information about you, reach you? And
we have a website, strongbrothersmagicshow.com, and that's usually we update that, and all the, because I've been writing stuff for Movie Phone too, and I have all the links for all that on there. So yeah,
awesome. This is the MacGuffin. You can find us at MacGuffinPodcast.com, Twitter.com/MacGuffinCast, and Facebook.com/MacGuffinPodcast. And thank you, Ryder. It's been
thanks for
great,
having me,
and,
man.
Good luck with everything this weekend.
Thank you.
T-1000 can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. Magneto can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. Even Zod can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. It's tight. Don't even try to bite the side style. Mr. Spock can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. The Wrath of Khan can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. The Borg can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. Because I've got space game and it feels alright.